Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at Hurricane Milton, but not the way you usually hear about it.
Right, we're going deeper than just the wind speed and the damage totals.
We're talking about the long-term impacts, the stories that unfold long after the storm moves on.
The stuff that you might not see on the news.
Exactly. Like one story that really got to me was this 83-year-old man in Polk County. He had Alzheimer's, and he sadly passed away after wandering off during the storm.
Oh, no.
It's heartbreaking because they found him in his own backyard. But the flooding was so bad they needed an airboat to reach him. It makes you think about all the unseen dangers during these events.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable certain populations are during disasters. People with health conditions, disabilities, elderly folks, they're often hit the hardest.
It's like everything's in chaos, and those who need the most help can sometimes fall through the cracks.
Exactly. And their routines are disrupted, familiar places are changed. It can be incredibly disorienting and frightening.
Especially for someone with Alzheimer's, like that poor man.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need for better support systems, both before and after a disaster. We need to be prepared to protect our most vulnerable citizens.
You know, and speaking of needing protection, it's not just people we have to worry about. You hear about all those alligators and stuff being displaced after the storm.
Oh, yeah. It's unsettling to think about, but it's a natural consequence of hurricanes.
Officials were warning people about alligators, stingrays, even crocodiles potentially ending up in flooded neighborhoods.
Right. These storms can completely upend ecosystems. Saltwater gets pushed into freshwater areas, forcing animals out of their usual habitats.
And people are wading around in that water, often with no idea what's lurking beneath the surface.
It's a good reminder that we're not alone in experiencing these events. The natural world takes a hit, too.
And sometimes those effects can be unpredictable and dangerous.
For sure. We have to respect the power of nature, especially after something as disruptive as a hurricane.
Absolutely. Speaking of disruptive, but on a different note entirely, did you hear about the controversy with Disney?
Which one? They seem to have a new one every week.
Well, this one's related to Hurricane Milton. Apparently, one of their resorts was charging stranded guests $10 for a basic sandwich kit during the storm.
$10 for, like, peanut butter and jelly.
That's what it sounds like. It sparked a whole debate about corporate responsibility during emergencies.
Yeah, it's a tough one. On the one hand, businesses have to keep the lights on, and in a disaster, costs do go up.
But on the other hand, $10 for a PB&J when people are stuck and desperate.
It feels icky, right? It raises questions about how far companies can go to protect their bottom line when people are in a vulnerable position.
It's like, where do you draw the line between reasonable pricing and taking advantage of a bad situation?
It's a blurry line for sure, and it brings up the whole idea of personal responsibility versus relying on institutions in times of crisis.
Like, should you always have your own emergency supplies? Or is there an expectation that larger organizations will step up and help?
Big questions. No easy answers.
Speaking of tough situations, this next story is a wild one. Did you hear about that ship captain, the one who got rescued twice by the Coast Guard?
Oh, yeah, that was incredible. Once before the hurricane hit, and then again after.
Twice. It's like, what are the odds? You'd think once would be enough to make anyone swear off boats forever.
Right. Talk about tempting fate. But there's actually more to his story. His first rescue, the one before the hurricane, wasn't just some random engine trouble. He was actually trying to sail his boat all the way from Florida to Cuba. His family was over there, and they were hit pretty hard by the hurricane that ripped through the Caribbean before Milton.
Wow, so he was trying to sail into a hurricane zone to help his family.
That's right. The Coast Guard picked him up, gave him the whole warning about Hurricane Milton bearing down on Florida, and basically told him, dude, you need to stay put. But get this.
He didn't listen.
Nope. As soon as the storm passed, he patched up his boat and took off again. And that's when he got caught in Milton's wake and ended up clinging to that cooler for dear life miles offshore.
Wow. Talk about determination. I mean, you have to admire his commitment to his family, risking his life like that.
It really makes you think, right? Like, it's easy to judge someone's actions when you don't know the full story.
Absolutely. We never really know what someone else is going through or what motivates them to do the things they do.
Exactly. And, speaking of motivation and resilience, it's not just about individual stories like this captain. Entire communities show incredible resilience in the face of disasters like Hurricane Milton.
That's a great point. We've talked about the human cost, the misinformation, the impact on wildlife, but what about The big picture. How do we recover from something like this as a society? That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating to me. It's not just about the immediate aftermath. It's about how we rebuild, how we learn, how we adapt.
Exactly. And those processes, they look different for everyone and everything. Take those displaced alligators we talked about. Their presence is a stark reminder that ecosystems are resilient, but they're also incredibly complex. Saltwater intrusion from the storm surge can have long-term effects on water quality, vegetation, even the balance of species in a given area.
It's like this ripple effect, isn't it? One change triggering a cascade of others.
Precisely. And we're not just talking about the natural world. Think about the economic impact of a hurricane like Milton. Businesses closed, tourism disrupted, livelihoods put on hold. These things have lasting consequences that require a collective effort to overcome.
It makes you realize that recovering from a disaster is a marathon, not a sprint. And it requires a certain level of, well, resilience on a societal level.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We need to be able to rebuild our infrastructure, support our communities, and learn from the experience so we're better prepared for the next one.
Which brings us back to those meteorologists facing death threats. If we're going to become more resilient as a society, we need accurate information to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. This is where combating misinformation becomes critical. We need to cultivate media literacy, encourage critical thinking, and support reliable sources of information.
It's a shared responsibility, isn't it? We all have a role to play in separating fact from fiction and making sure that the information we're sharing and acting upon is accurate.
Precisely. And it's not always easy. Misinformation often preys on our emotions, our biases, our desire for simple explanations in a complex world. But by being more aware, by asking questions, by seeking out diverse perspectives, we can become more discerning consumers of information.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of cautious optimism. There's no denying the devastation, the heartbreak, the challenges that Hurricane Milton has left in its wake. But there's also this incredible capacity for resilience, for adaptation, for learning and growing that gives me hope.
Well said. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this conversation, it's a renewed appreciation for the interconnectedness of it all, the way a single event can ripple out and touch so many aspects of our world.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, and that even in the face of incredible challenges, the human spirit and the natural world have an amazing ability to adapt and overcome.
Beautifully put. I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these ripples. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay connected.